Hello, this is Dave from the Wizard's Keep in Muncie, Indiana. And 2 years ago, I did a series of videos counting down my top 60 board games of all time. Well, 2 years have passed. I've had a chance to play a lot more games, kind of refine some of my taste on some of the games I've already played. And so I thought I'd do a new series of videos, this time counting down my top 80 board games of all time. And to kind of start off, my number 80th board game is Explorers of the North Sea. Now, Explorers of the North Sea is part of a trilogy games called the North Sea Trilogy. Each one has like a Viking theme to it, and also each one has different mechanics. So like Raiders of the North Sea is a worker placement game, Shipwrights of the North Sea is kind of a drafting take that game, and Explorers of the North Sea is a tile laying game. Now how that works is on your turn you're going to draw a tile, lay it out, kind of building these series of islands. And you can decide to place different scouts on those islands, and at the end of the game, whoever has the most presence on an island is going to score that island. The larger the island, the more victory points you get. You also can raid different cities for victory points. You can collect different animals, like different animals will pop up on the island. You can put those animals in your boat, take them back to your home base. And depending on the different types of animals you collect, you're going to exponentially score a different amount of victory points. So there's a lot of different ways to get victory points in Explorers of the North Sea. And that's kind of one of the things I like about it. My number 79th game is a little card game called Coup. Now, Coup is a bluffing card game. And how that works is at the beginning of each game, each player is going to be dealt 2 cards face down. Now, you can look at those cards yourself at any time, but they're secret from your opponents. And what those cards do, they kind of serve 2 purposes. One, they count as your kind of like your life total, because if both of your cards are ever eliminated, you're out of the game. But they also, each card will grant you special abilities. So on your turn, you can use those special abilities, sometimes collecting coins, sometimes spending those coins, maybe assassinate your other opponent's cards, or maybe blocking their assassins, and so on. The nice thing about Coup, though, is you can actually use the actions of cards you don't have by bluffing and lying and say, oh yeah, I've got the assassin card, I'm going to spend 3 coins and kill one of your cards. But then another player can call out your bluff if they don't believe that you actually have the assassin card. But there's a risk to that because, well, there's a risk for bluffing and a risk for calling out somebody's bluff. If you bluff and someone calls you out, then you have to discard one of your cards, therefore sacrificing half of your life total, or maybe eliminating yourself from the game if you've already down to 1 card. But if they call out your bluff and they're wrong, meaning they say, I don't think you have the assassin card, but you in fact do, they're going to lose one of their cards. So it's very kind of risky bluffing and also risky calling other people's bluffs out. And that's kind of the tenseness that I like about this game. Is someone going to call your bluff? Or is somebody bluffing? Or should you call them out or not? And that's really the crux of what makes Coup so good. My number 78th favorite game is a cooperative dice Lovecraft themed game called Elder Sign. In Elder Sign, each player, you're like employees of this kind of eldritch museum with all these different exhibits. And so you're kind of working together to try to solve each of these exhibits or whatever have different objectives or missions to them. Like cultists might be trying to break in to steal one of these items from the museum, or they might be leaking eldritch essence, and you need to kind of like close that portal before it summons monsters. And so what you're going to do, you're going to roll different dice to get different symbols that you need those symbols to kind of fulfill these objectives. And when you fulfill those objectives, you're going to get different rewards. Sometimes they might be an item card, sometimes they might be extra bonus dice on a future roll, they might be extra re-rolls, etc. But ultimately, some of the missions will have elder signs. And as a group, you want to collect so many elder signs before some larger elder god arrives. Because if you don't fail to do so and the elder god arrives, you're going to have to fight him, which means most likely you're going to lose. And so that's the thing I like. I love the theme of Elder Sign, but I also like cooperative games and the puzzle of figuring out who should do what and the pressure luck nature of it. And that's what I like about Elder Sign. My number 77th favorite game is another dice chucking game, and that is Machi Koro. Now, Machi Koro is kind of it's a dice engine building game, because on your turn you're going to roll a die or maybe 2 dice, depending your choice, and then the nice thing, it's sort of like Seller's Catan, where even when it's not your turn, you got to pay attention to other players' turns because you might still acquire some sort of benefit. Because if you roll a die, let's say you roll a 5, then everybody who has a card with a 5 on it is going to trigger that card, which will maybe give them some sort of resources or some action or something like that. And you use those resources to be able to purchase more cards that you can place out. So as the game goes on, you've got more cards that are triggered by more different dice rolls. And that's the nice thing about Manticore, because it starts off maybe only every few turns you kind of trigger something. But then by the end of the game, you're going to be triggering multiple resources. So it kind of every turn based on every die roll. So it kind of snowballs. So it starts small and kind of builds later. And that's what I like about Manticore. It's very fulfilling to get that snowball rolling. My number 76th favorite game is a tile-laying game called Alhambra, or a city-based game, or city game, or tile game, whatever you want to call it. So in Alhambra, on your turn, you're going to have a couple different choices. You can either discard cards from your hand to be able to purchase different tiles that you can put in your city or your Alhambra, or you can acquire more cards. The other thing that's kind of neat about it, you're trying to efficiently spend those cards, because when you're buying tiles, they're going to have different costs, and those cards are going to have values on those cards. So you may have and suits. So to buy a particular tile, maybe it's got cost 11 of purple. Well, you can discard any number of cards as long as they're 11 or greater of purple cards from your hand to be able to acquire that tile to put in your city. So let's say you had a total value of, you discard 3 cards and it's a 14, then you're going to buy that tile and place in your city. But the nice thing about Alhambra is it's also about efficiency, because if you can get the exact change, or so you discard a number of cards from your hand of the proper suit, and it equals exactly the number for that tile, then you get to go again, either getting more cards, placing more tiles, and so on. So you're kind of trying to build your city in such a way that you get victory points, but it's all about trying to get extra actions by being able to discard cards in an efficient manner to be able to get more actions than your opponents, and therefore be able to play more tiles and get more victory points. And that's what I like about Alhambra. My number 75th favorite game is a deck building game, Marvel Legendary. This is another cooperative game, so you can actually play competitively, but if you play competitively, it's about chasing down victory points, sort of like Dominion or something. Building your deck to get different actions to get victory points. But I prefer to play it cooperatively, so everybody's going to work together to kind of beat different Marvel supervillains that have different schemes and objectives. And if you can beat them before they fulfill all those objectives, then you're going to win the game. It's a deck building game. If you're not familiar with deck building games, they all kind of function the same way. So you start off the game with everyone has the same deck of cards, and in Marvel Legendary, it's basically money or attack. And on your turn, you can spend those attack the different villains, or you could spend that money to buy more cards that you can add to your deck. So as the game goes on, you're adding more and more cards to your deck. So everybody's deck's going to be different at that point, with a different strategy. And in Marvel Legendary, those different cards you're buying are different superheroes, like adding Spider-Man to your deck, or Thor, or Wolverine. And you can use those. You use Spider-Man and Wolverine to be able to hopefully attack the bad villain. And that is Marvel Legendary. My number 74 game is also another cooperative game, and that is Shadows over Camelot. In Shadows over Camelot, each player is a member of the Knights of the Round Table. And so based on which member you are, you're going to have a different special ability, which is kind of cool. So every time you play the game, it has a little bit of replay value, because one time you can play Sir Lancelot, the other time you play Galahad, and they're going to have different abilities, so you're going to be able to try out different strategy each time you play. The other cool thing about this game is it has the option to play with a trader. And what that means is, though it's a cooperative game, or supposed to be a cooperative game, potentially if one of the players is a trader, they're working with the game. So they win the game if the game wins, which adds a lot of paranoia to the game, because on everybody's turn you have 2 actions. When it's your turn, you have to do some sort of good action to kind of help the Knights of the Round Table, but you also have to pick an action that helps evil. So everybody has to do it, so you try to do it as a group in such a way that you're not helping evil too much. But if someone picks an action and you think that's a little bit of a dubious action, then you start getting paranoid. You wonder, hey, is that person the traitor? And even when they're not the traitor, so there's a lot of table talk, a lot of bluffing going on, and that's what I like about Shadows over Camelot. My number 73rd favorite game is another Viking-themed game, and that is Champions of Midgard. In Champions of Midgard, it's kind of a dice-chucking worker placement Viking-themed game. In this game, the Jarl, or the leader of the Viking tribe, has just perished, and each player is vying to be the next Jarl. In order to do so, you've got to prove to the tribe your worth. And that could be going on different missions, killing different trolls that threaten the tribe, or just going out doing heroic deeds. How you do that is you have a set amount of workers, you're going to place them in different areas to either go on those raids, defeat those trolls, or you can be acquiring more soldiers that you can use on those raids. And what those soldiers are different dice. So there are spearmen, which have a specialty dice. They work differently. They have different shields so they can live longer. You can get swordsmen, which are kind of middle of the road. You can get axemen, who do a lot of damage but are not very defensive. So they're going to kill something, but they're probably going to die as well. And if they protect themselves, you can use those soldiers for future raids, but if they die, then you're gonna have to go collect more axemen or more soldiers. So that's it's kind of has a good blend between Amerithrash games and Euro games, because it's got that worker placement, resource management of Euro games, but it has that kind of Amerithrash feel, like chucking a bunch of dice, killing lots of monsters, and that's what makes Champions of Midgard so good. My number 72 favorite game of all time is a party game called Dixit. How Dixit works is it kind of has mechanically it works a lot like Apples to Apples or Cards Against Humanity, but you're playing these cards that are textless art cards, and they have this beautiful different art in this game, and that's really the biggest appeal of Dixit. But what you do on your turn, you kind of rotate around the room or around the table like you would being the judge in Apples to Apples, but in this case it's the narrator. The narrator will take a card, at one of these textless art cards, say something about that card, and lay it face down. Then every other player will pick cards from their hand that they believe kind of emulates what the narrator just said, and places those down. Then they all get shuffled up and then placed face up, and then everyone gets to vote on which card they believe is the narrator's card. Now, the narrator wants people to pick their card, but they don't want it to be too obvious. Because if everybody picks the narrator's card, then everybody else gets points, but the narrator does not. But otherwise, as long as not everybody picks the narrator's card, you're going to get points based on the number of players that pick your card. So you have to find that balance. You want people to be able to guess your card, but you don't want it to be too obvious. So you don't want to, this right here, you got this cat here looking in this fishbowl. You don't want to say cat in a fishbowl, because then everybody's going to know which card is yours. But you might just say Fluffy or something, who knows. And then hoping that they think the cat's name's Fluffy, but then somebody else might be playing a card that has clouds on them. So, and then the benefit of doing that is if you play a card that emulates what the narrator said and someone picks your card, you're going to gain victory points. So you're trying to play the cards that are like the narrators, at the same time. So there's a lot of just different interpretations, and that's what makes and creativity, and that's what makes Dixit such a good game. And my last game for this video anyway is my number 71 favorite game, and that is another cooperative game, Forbidden Island. And Forbidden Island, you're working together to try to collect these treasures off this island before the island sinks. And the other cool thing about it is, much like Shadows over Camelot, is each player plays a different character that has a different special ability. So each time you play it, you can kind of mix it up and get to try out different strategies when you're playing the game. But you work together, kind of based on people's strategies, to try to collect these items, these different treasures to get them off the island before the island sinks, or you might be trying to shore up different sections, maybe laying sandbags to try to stop some of the flooding of some of the islands so you can still navigate through the island. And as the game goes on, the islands are going to start sinking faster and faster, kind of building up that pressure and that intensity, and that's what makes Forbidden Island such a good game. Well, thank you for tuning in and checking this video out, and I hope you liked this video, and if you have any questions about any of these other games, or any games in general, feel free to contact me on Facebook or on YouTube, and I'll be happy to answer any of the questions about any of these games or any others. And also look forward to, in the future, I'll start counting down the rest of my top 80 board games of all time. So thank you for tuning in.